She's the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York. Follow her voice, a stray dog is nice. She's a pushy broad from the Bronx, oh yeah. Don't be surprised if you wanna listen twice. Make decisions, find the right choice. Know yourself better, find your own voice. It's okay if you need help today, cause everybody needs a little push. From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.
Welcome, Transformation Talk Network listeners. My name is Ellen Stewart, and I am the pushy broad from the Bronx. Welcome to my show, Recovery Recharged, where we share advice and support from experts in addiction and recovery. We cannot talk enough about this topic. And now, since it is September and it's National Recovery Month, I want to bring to your attention something that every parent is worried about. In today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the heart of adolescent and young adult substance abuse and the hope of recovery. We're going to explore all the unique hurdles that our young people face, and we're going to talk to an expert while we're doing this. This is a very dear friend of mine who has finally consented to come on my show after 5 years of trying to get him on the air. This is David Rotenberg. David is the newly appointed Chief Clinical Officer at Turnbridge Treatment Center. He brings a wealth of experience with over 28 years in clinical psychology and health administration. He is recognized for his innovative leadership in behavioral health care, especially integrating care for mental health and substance use disorders. He is an expert, a very dear friend, and he is going to talk with passion and expertise about the young adult population and their trials and tribulations in substance abuse. The Pushy Broad from the Bronx and Recovery Recharged welcomes my very dear friend and guest, David Rotenberg. Good morning, David. How are you?
Hey, Ellen, Pushy Broad, I love you. I'm thrilled to see you anytime, but especially to talk about adolescents and young adults. What could be more important to our country than America's youth and young adults and taking care of them the way we do? So thanks for having me.
You are welcome. I want to get right into it, and I want to talk about some of the unique challenges that adolescents face today when it comes to substance misuse that may be different from when you first started out.
You mean like when I first started out with my own adolescence, my friend, smoking the weakest stems and seeds and THC that we didn't know back then. And when I got into my own recovery in 1991 and made it back into the industry as a behavioral health professional, certainly so much has changed, right? You have the pressures you asked about pressures and differences for kids. Think about social media. Think about growing up in the unsafe environment that is our political landscape, financial volatility, gun violence, anxious parents, even statistics, Ellen, that we think about and might marvel at. Like, for instance, today's youth smokes less marijuana, or the number is flat in comparison to 10 years ago. That needs to come with an asterisk. And what I mean by that is today's marijuana and THC products are 50 to 100 times more potent than yesteryears. So even a statistic like that seems like a victory or a stalemate needs to say, wait a minute, if the same number of kids are smoking, or even a little bit less, they're still smoking, by the way, the most dangerous THC that we've ever seen. When I was growing up and when I was first a clinician, you didn't hear cannabis-induced psychosis. You heard those terms in relation to LSD and PCP. Now, on a routine basis, I see at Turnbridge kids that are coming into treatment following a short-term psychiatric hold for cannabis-induced psychosis. So the THC levels are through the roof. the attitudes around that drug in particular are more liberal, like the laws themselves are more liberal than ever before. And yet, kids and young adults seemingly have increased levels of anxiety and depression that they're dealing with. When you think of those stats and those notions, you can only wonder what it means for the next generation coming up through the ranks. So the reason I joined Turnbridge in April, my friend, after a lengthy career at Karen, was I think Turnbridge gives me the best opportunity to join a place that is impactful, most impactful with adolescents and young adults. After a 20-year run, Turnbridge, of just young adult treatment, 4 or 5 years ago, they started to launch the adolescent program. And that has taken off and really done well to the point where we need to build more beds to house the kids that need treatment. And an interesting thing is happening, Ellen. Unlike never before in my career, going back to your original question, there are more girls, young girls in treatment today than boys. What does that say to you? Girls are being noticed more. Their pathology is not just hidden in the family system and housed at home. Girls are being recognized for their own mental health problems like never before. And Turnbridge, to the credit of the organization, has not only a drug and alcohol license, but a psychiatric license. And that's part of the reason I believe you're seeing more girls entering treatment at that facility.
Well, you've said quite a mouthful here, so I want to try to break down some things. First of all,
Sure.
we can absolutely see that the THC content in marijuana, as we have been documenting, is 50 to 100 times greater, which is why it doesn't matter what's going on in terms of what happened before. Right now, kids are smoking more and more dangerously. What they're imbibing is creating new mental health disorders. You're also saying to me that girls, for the first time, are coming out more with social problems and mental health problems. And I know now you're in a facility that's going to treat it. So let's talk about the background of these kids. What's happening with their peer pressure? How is this manifesting itself? What are the things that kids are saying to you about how they got started and how they keep going?
Sure. I think they get the difference between the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s is their peers are not just the inner circle of 4 to 5 kids that they're face to face with. Their peer group is 1 million strong because of social media. They're being influenced by massive amounts of people, celebrities to regular folks to TikTok users and everyone under the sun, Ellen. So the scope of influence on today's teen and the flood of information that today's teen is ingesting is unlike ever before. And so social media is impactful. Other differences that we're seeing from yesteryear, boys have more body image issues and eating disorder than in years past. Why, Ellen? Because of social media, because of influencers on TV and social media. They're seeing and involved in more use of creatine, more use of steroids, more use of bodybuilding, and their body image issues are spiking. Parents are more anxious than ever before. Why? For the same reasons. They are flooded with information. They are flooded with what to do, what not to do. They're not just taking feedback from their inner circle. Their parental feedback is also exponentially greater. And so I know, Ellen, that I always say a mouthful, and I'm sure a 30-minute segment can't possibly contain all that we must talk about. But we must talk about what I feel is going to be the confluence of events: social media, increased THC, increased social factors, increased external factors and pressures, unlike years past, that are going to really create a vulnerability in the teen population that we've never seen before. And I have to say, 5 or 6 years ago in our industry, let's say 2017, 18, 19, right before COVID, many providers in the behavioral health space actually left the adolescent treatment domain. And that was terribly impactful across the country. And now what you're seeing, when I describe Turnbridge as leaning in right around when COVID hit, I'm congratulating their leadership to have the vision and to have the chutzpah to actually lean into that space. And now you're seeing the rest of the country sort of say, wait a minute, we forgot about teens in every level of care, in psychiatric, in drug and alcohol, in residential. And now we have to come all the way back and really lean into this most vulnerable population. Frankly, the reason internally that I wanted to go to Turnbridge is because I'm invested in my internal mission in treating the most vulnerable underdog. And when you ask me, what do teens and young adults have to face? High school, transition to college, transition and pressure to their peers, romantic inclinations, the physical changes and mental health changes that emerge in the teenage and young adult years. They have so many different pressures on them, and they cannot be a forgotten group when it comes to treatment providers. And so, again, I had to join Turnbridge because they are all about young adult and adolescent care, best in class. And every time I turn around at this organization, which is, I'm there less than 6 months, I'm blown away by another best in class aspect of their continuum of care.
And where is Turnbridge for our listeners?
Turnbridge is all around New Haven. They have pockets of young adult and adolescent care at different levels. They have residential adolescent for psychiatric and drug and alcohol. They have outpatient care. They have extended care for adolescent. They have the best in class for the last 20 years of the young adult continuum, as I mentioned earlier. And again, having the foresight to jump into the adolescent space when others were departing says a lot about their character and their interest in helping others. I feel like if you help a teen, you know, our people, not drug addicts, but the Jews, our people say, if you save one life, you save the whole world. And I say that's terrific. Like, what a beautiful concept. If you save or help a kid, a young person get sober and get their mental health needs in check today, you are impacting their current family, their future family, the society we live in, the academic society that they are from, the legal system and the healthcare system in the most profound way. And so find Turnbridge in Connecticut, based in New Haven. You will not be disappointed. But let me say this before it sounds too much like a Turnbridge commercial, Ellen. I am an ambassador for young people getting their needs met. Turnbridge gives me the best opportunity to do that. And that's why I joined. That's my brand. And that's why I needed to be affiliated with this terrific place.
And as David mentioned, for us, because we are an international show, it is New Haven, Connecticut, if you want to find help for adolescents. David, can you tell me how young you treat them?
So, Ellen, the youngest kids are 13. So the adolescent program is 13 to 17. There are places that treat very young kids, 6, 7, 8, up through 12. That is not what Turnbridge does, but there are other places that do that. And then the young adult is after high school. It's usually 18 to around 30 years old is who they treat.
So tell us in general, from a clinical point of view, what actual treatment works. People don't know much about residential treatment, and I know that Turnbridge is really important and really impactful. But as a clinician, speaking a little bit more generally, what have you found as a successful treatment approach for adolescents that are struggling in this way?
Thanks for asking, Ellen. Me and you grew up in what I would describe as an adult system, built by adults, for adults, largely driven by 12-step philosophy and integration. And that still has a place in treatment. However, most adult treatment looks like sit around in a group, do a 12-person group therapy, do an individual therapy session, and not much else. Certainly well into the 90s and early 2000s, robust adolescent and young adult care integrates group therapy still, integrates 12 steps, but you have to have a host of other issues and treatment modalities: equine therapy, art therapy, music therapy, fitness and wellness, nutrition. You have to have high school if you're going to do adolescent care. You're going to have college prep and college remote access if you're going to do a young adult treatment program. You have to have an exceptional family program. Any treatment center worth its salt must deal with the family system. Why? Because the young person and their pathology is often a symptom of the family system's existing pathology. If you find an adolescent and a young adult with mental health and drug and alcohol problems, you can bet your sweet pushy self, my friend, that the family system, parents and siblings, also have drug and alcohol and mental health issues. If those things are not actively addressed real time, you are going to be woefully deficient in your treatment approach. And then, of course, what I didn't mention yet, which is as big as any factor, is psychology and psychiatry must be done real time. The old model of care that we grew up in, you got sober, you detoxed. 6 to 12 months later, if you were still suffering from psychiatric disorder, you then got help for that. You then got proper medication and therapy on board. Failure to do that in conjunction with active drug and alcohol therapy and all the other modalities that I just mentioned is a built-in relapse trap.
So tell me, when an adolescent comes to treatment, what are you finding is the most prevalent situation? Because adolescence comes in, is it all about marijuana? Is it pills? Is it a plethora of things? What are you seeing?
You're seeing certainly the biggest use, the most widely used drugs are still the big three, which is going to be nicotine, marijuana, and alcohol. But you're also seeing, Ellen, 13 and 14-year-old kids landing at Turnbridge that have no drug and alcohol on board and are strictly psychiatric patients, which is interesting. And then as they get older, these kids, the kids with mental illness, are most vulnerable to smoking today's weed and THC products, to drinking and other drugs. But they're also doing benzodiazepines. They're also doing psychostimulants. Some are doing heroin and opiates, although that's more pronounced in the young adult crowd. Okay, so the typical adolescent coming in is probably has depression, anxiety, some eating disorder, parent-child conflict, academic deficits, negative peer involvement, and is starting to abuse one or two substances, along with nicotine, if you want to make that three. That's a typical kid.
Can you address the vaping situation briefly?
Vaping, thoughtfully done as a nicotine replacement product for cigarette smokers initially, is now a terrible situation where people are taking their vaping in. So kids are smoking less, which is great news. But as I said earlier, no current stat is without flaw. And if they're vaping more, we're going to find out, Ellen, and we're already starting to, that vaping is just as dangerous or even worse than smoking cigarettes, as they always have done. These nicotine people, let's say the marketers for cigarettes in the past, when they used to do Joe Camel and made it popular for kids without saying so, are now doing the same candy-flavored vaping products, which are, of course, attracting kids. So when you see a kid checking into treatment at Turnbridge or elsewhere, most of them are going to be actively vaping, and they're going to have to come off of that and do a nicotine patch and get therapy, adjunct therapy, and perhaps other medications to deal with their cravings and their nicotine cessation. So vaping is a big deal, not only for nicotine. Let's be honest, you can smoke THC in a vape. You can seamlessly use a vape for any number of things that are not health conscious. And that's sad, because I think the product itself was devised as a thoughtful nicotine replacement product for adult smokers. And it has now morphed into a part of today's youth culture, where when I attend a 12-step meeting and the average age is 20 to 30, you can guarantee a bunch of things. More kids are going to vape. More of them are going to have tattoos. More of them are going to have piercings. And that's okay, but it has definitely been part of the culture, and vape included, which is unfortunate.
So now that we're at the beginning of the school year, colleges have started. Most of the schools along the South and Midwest have gone back. Our East Coast schools will be returning shortly. Parents are looking very, very hard at their kids to see certain warning signs. If they feel that their child requires treatment, give us an idea in general what kinds of questions parents should be asking about where to place their child.
Sure. So most parents are going to start to see a decline in functioning, including slipping of grades, or quitting the football or soccer team in the fall, or failing to play basketball in the winter, or a shift in peer involvement, or isolation from family with significant mood instability. If you're not sure if your child, your adolescent, is impaired psychiatrically, drug and alcohol wise, or both, a good starting point, frankly, a lot of school-based professionals who are in tune might be helpful. And then I think most kids, long before they go to a place like Turnbridge for residential care, are going to be seen by a really well-versed drug and alcohol professional who has a master's degree and is well-versed with mental health issues, so that they can properly assess the patient's pathology and also what we call their level of care needs. There's different levels of care: individual therapy, intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, and then residential care. So not every kid, in fact, most kids don't need to go directly into residential care. That's akin to doing surgery before you try physical therapy. Most kids need to be seen on an outpatient basis by a really well-versed clinician who understands drug and alcohol, mental health, family systems, and hopefully has a psychiatrist in their office. That's what I would say.
So that's where we start, and that's a really good thing. So let's talk about success stories. How long in residential would one be, and what happens on the outset? What happens when they're finished?
So the typical kid that I see at Turnbridge, to my delight, Ellen, goes there through their insurance, which is important because treatment can cost an arm and a leg. And so the residential component for Turnbridge Adolescent accepts insurance, and we are routinely getting 50, 55, and 60-day length of stay, which is astounding in our world. And that's a huge starting point. But when you're dealing with the youngest, most vulnerable segment of the population, 60 days is often just a starting point. Most of those kids are going to need extended care, or at minimum, partial hospitalization. Some need a therapeutic boarding school. Most need ongoing psychiatric care. Certainly they need family therapy as part of the routine and part of their agenda. So there's a number of factors, depending on the age of the patient, depending on how deep the pathology might be, that are going to inform you when you're developing what I would call the continuing care plan.
But this is very hopeful, yes, because you do see success stories.
You absolutely see success stories. And the message to your listeners, Ellen, is drug and alcohol treatment and mental health treatment is not the same as cutting the cast off a broken leg after 4 to 6 weeks and then hoping for healing. Drug and alcohol and behavioral health therapy is a process. And the message needs to be the longer the length of engagement in an interdisciplinary approach, which is psychiatry, drug and alcohol, fitness, wellness, sleep hygiene, eating habits, psychiatry and family therapy. The longer the length of engagement, the greater success there is, the better the longitudinal outcomes are going to be. And by the way, people who quit smoking, vaping, and doing tobacco products have better longitudinal results for recovery from mental health and drug and alcohol.
Terrific, David.
We should throw that part in there for all those vapors out there.
David, it's such a pleasure. It's been such a pleasure to have you today. You're right. We can talk about this for a very long time. I will have you back as a collaborator for this show. There are many things that I want you to bring to the table, especially in your expertise of adolescent and young adult treatment. Thank you so much. If you are interested in finding out more, go to turnbridge.com. This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad, saying thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, saying thanks for listening, and remember, everybody needs a little push.
From the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, New York.